It's a global phenomenon.
No, I'm recognised, yeah, it is. I mean, he's with me for life. You know? And it was great. It was a magical time in my life.
Pierce Brosnan was born on May 16th, 1953, in a small Irish town called Drogheda. His entrance into the world didn't come with glamour, fame, or promise. In fact, the very first tragedy of his life happened before he could even understand it. His father, Thomas Brosnan, a carpenter by trade, simply left. No farewell, no final hug, no tragic accident, just silence. Pierce once said he never knew the sound of his father's voice. That kind of absence cuts deep, especially for a child. What came next was even harder. In 1957, when he was only 4 years old, his mother, May, made the painful decision to leave Ireland. She travelled to London to work as a nurse, hoping to create a better future for them both. She promised it would only be temporary, but a short while turned into 7 long years. During that time, Pierce was passed between relatives, first his grandparents in Navan, then an aunt and uncle in Trim. Each home had new rules, different expectations, and unfamiliar routines. There was no place to call his own. Over time, Pierce learned how to disappear in plain sight. He became quiet, observant, and careful not to take up too much space. His teachers noticed something about him, a kind of quiet intelligence. He was always looking out the window, like he was searching for something just beyond reach. It wasn't joy, it was stability. In 1964, his mother returned, but she wasn't alone. She had married a man named William Carmichael. Thankfully, William wasn't the kind of stepfather you dread hearing about. He was kind, calm, and didn't try to force anything. He took the time to teach Pierce how to fish, how to fix broken things, and maybe most importantly, how to trust again. That same year, something unexpected happened. William took Pierce to the movies. The film was Goldfinger, and it starred Sean Connery as James Bond. Sitting in that dark theatre, watching Bond move through the screen with confidence and strength, Pierce felt something click. That's who I want to be, he thought. It was the first time he saw a version of himself that felt powerful. It wasn't just about the action, it was about control, about being someone who never had to beg for stability. By the time he was 16, Pierce was accepted into St. Martin's School of Art in London. He was interested in painting and inspired by the works of Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud. But life was still tough. He lived on toast and tea while his classmates enjoyed warm meals. He didn't come from wealth or privilege. What he had was grit. But here's where his story takes a turn. In 1971, he wandered into a small theatre workshop. Inside, he saw a fire eater rehearsing for a show. On impulse, Pierce asked to try it himself. That moment, completely random and unplanned, changed everything. The group saw something in him. Not just courage, but presence. A kind of quiet strength. They encouraged him to pursue acting. That's when Pierce Brosnan's path to fame really began. He was accepted into the Drama Centre London, known for its intense training. More than half the students didn't make it to graduation. But Pierce stayed. He juggled odd jobs, studied Shakespeare, learned mime, and even practiced circus arts. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to be excellent at it. And from there, the journey truly began. After years of struggle and persistence, Pierce Brosnan finally made his professional acting debut in 1976 in a stage production of Wait Until Dark. It wasn't a leading role, and it didn't bring instant fame, but it gave him something far more important: confidence. Just a year later, he appeared in The Red Devil Battery Sign, a Tennessee Williams play that had failed in America but found a second life in London, thanks in part to Pierce's magnetic presence on stage. It wasn't long before Hollywood came calling, slowly but surely. In 1980, Pierce appeared briefly in The Mirror Cracked, sharing a scene with Elizabeth Taylor. His role lasted less than 30 seconds, and the paycheck was only £50. Still, he took it seriously. That same year, he landed a minor role in The Long Good Friday, a British gangster film starring Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. The film later became a cult classic, and though Pierce's role was small, it placed him on the radar. But the real turning point came in 1982. Pierce auditioned for a small part in an upcoming NBC detective show called Remington Steele. He didn't expect much. But when the producers saw him, everything changed. He didn't just get the part, he became the lead. At just 29 years old and virtually unknown in the US, Pierce had just landed his first major break. Remington Steele premiered on October 1st, 1982. It aired in over 80 countries and quickly gained a loyal fan base. Week after week, more than 15 million viewers tuned in. Brosnan's mix of charm, wit and sophistication made him a standout. Almost overnight, he became a household name. And then came the whispers. Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. The moment he stepped on screen in a tailored suit, comparisons began. Fans and critics alike couldn't stop talking about how perfect he would be for the role. But this wasn't just a fan theory. In 1983, he visited the set of For Your Eyes Only, where his wife, actress Cassandra Harris, had a small role. Bond producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli noticed Pierce. He turned to someone nearby and said, "If he can act, he's my guy." It looked like destiny was calling, but things didn't go as planned. Roger Moore was expected to retire from the Bond role, but the studio convinced him to stay for one more film. Pierce's chance slipped away, and it happened again just a few years later. In 1986, Remington Steele was cancelled, and Brosnan was once again considered for Bond. Negotiations began, fans were excited, but at the last second, NBC decided to revive Remington Steele for one final season. Bound by contract, Pierce had no choice but to drop out. The role went to Timothy Dalton. Imagine chasing your dream twice and losing it both times. Pierce never complained publicly, but the disappointment ran deep. The next several years are now known among fans as the Lost Bond years. Still, he kept working. He starred in thrillers like The Fourth Protocol, supernatural dramas like Nomads, and even appeared in light-hearted commercials, always in a tuxedo, always nodding to the role that wasn't yet his. But in 1994, the phone finally rang again. This time, it was real. Pierce Brosnan was officially cast as James Bond, not as a backup, not as a maybe. He had earned it. When GoldenEye hit theatres in 1995, it wasn't just another Bond film. The franchise was at risk. After a 6-year hiatus and legal disputes behind the scenes, James Bond had lost some of his shine. If GoldenEye failed, it could have meant the end of the iconic series, but Pierce Brosnan delivered big time. The film grossed $353 million worldwide and reintroduced Bond to an entirely new generation. It wasn't just about box office numbers, it was about bringing elegance, danger and charisma back to a character that had started to feel outdated. Brosnan's version of Bond struck the perfect balance between the suaveness of Sean Connery and the toughness of Timothy Dalton. He made Bond cool again, and Pierce wasn't afraid to take risks. In one of the film's most unforgettable moments, Bond leaps from a 220-metre dam in a breathtaking bungee jump. It was so dangerous that the production's insurance didn't even cover it, but Pierce insisted. He wanted to prove he could do more than just wear the tux. He could be the real thing. Over the next several years, he starred in 3 more Bond films: Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Together, the 4 films grossed over $1.2 billion. Brosnan was no longer the guy who almost played Bond. He was Bond for an entire era of fans. But even at the height of his success, there was heartbreak just below the surface. While the world saw a polished superstar on red carpets and magazine covers, at home, Brosnan was still carrying the kind of grief most people can't imagine. It all went back to his wife, Cassandra Harris. They had met in the late 1970s, long before Pierce became a global name. Cassandra was already an established actress, and she had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher. Pierce didn't just accept them, he embraced them. In 1980, they got married, and in 1983, they had a son of their own, Sean. In public, they looked like a picture-perfect family, but life behind closed doors was changing fast. In 1987, while Pierce was filming abroad, Cassandra started experiencing strange fatigue and persistent pain. It didn't seem serious at first, but once they returned to London, the diagnosis hit like a freight train: advanced ovarian cancer. From that moment on, everything else came second. Acting, fame, career. All of it took a back seat to hospital visits, treatment plans, and simply surviving day to day. For 4 years, Pierce stood by her side. He called himself the quiet partner, the one who held her hand and stayed calm when nothing else made sense. Their son, Sean, still a young boy, would dress up as a toy doctor and try to make his mum smile. It was sweet, it was innocent, and it was heartbreaking. Cassandra's strength through it all left people speechless. She endured surgery after surgery and rounds of grueling chemotherapy. She lost her hair, her energy, but never her dignity. In the final weeks, she would whisper to Pierce at night, not about pain or fear, but about love and letting go. Just one day after their 11th wedding anniversary, on December 28, 1991, she passed away at age 43. It was the day Pierce Brosnan's world truly shattered. He was left to raise 3 children, navigate Hollywood, and somehow keep functioning through unbearable grief. He didn't cry in front of his kids. Instead, he stayed strong, for them. But at night, he would walk the hallways of their home, stopping at each bedroom door, just to make sure they were breathing, because that's all he had left to hold on to: life. Grief didn't leave Pierce Brosnan. It stayed with him like a shadow, shaping how he lived, worked, and loved. Even as the world cheered him on in his role as James Bond, he carried that loss silently. The red carpets, premieres, and interviews were just the surface. Underneath, there was a man who had lost his wife, his partner, and his children's mother. But life had another cruel twist waiting. Just when Pierce began finding some rhythm again, balancing fatherhood and career, grief returned. This time, it came for his daughter. Charlotte, Cassandra's daughter from her previous marriage, had been raised by Pierce as his own. She was strong, thoughtful, and carried so much of her mother's grace. But hidden deep inside her was a tragic connection to Cassandra. Ovarian cancer ran in the family. In 2010, Charlotte began showing symptoms. At first, they were easy to dismiss: fatigue, vague aches, and low energy. But Pierce knew better. He had seen this before. The air around her felt too familiar. Soon, doctors confirmed the diagnosis: ovarian cancer. The same disease that had taken her mother was now threatening to take her too. For 3 long years, Charlotte fought. She had 2 children of her own, Isabella and Lucas, and she wasn't ready to leave them. She underwent surgeries, rounds of chemotherapy, and endured months of physical and emotional strain. But like her mother, she faced it all with grace. She didn't ask for pity, she asked for time to raise her kids, to make memories, and to show them what real strength looks like. Then, in June 2013, she did something incredible. Knowing her time was short, Charlotte put on a white dress and married the man she loved, Alex. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a final act of joy. Surrounded by her children, family, and closest friends, she stood tall, smiling through pain. 2 weeks later, she passed away. It was June 28th, 2013. A Friday, a date Pierce would never forget. Charlotte was 41 years old. Her daughter, Isabella, was 15, the same age Charlotte had been when Cassandra was first diagnosed. Her son, Lucas, was just 8, the same age Pierce's son, Sean, had been when Cassandra died. The eerie symmetry wasn't lost on anyone, and just like that, Pierce was back in the same nightmare, burying another woman he loved, this time his daughter, and once again, trying to stay strong for grandchildren who were too young to fully understand what they had lost. But there's something deeper that made this loss almost unbearable. It wasn't just about saying goodbye to Charlotte, it was about reliving Cassandra's death all over again. The same hospital routines, the same fear, the same waiting rooms with bad coffee and quiet tears. It was like life had pressed repeat on his worst memory and made him sit through it all again. Pierce later spoke at a cancer fundraiser. His voice didn't shake, but the pain was clear. "I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie," he said. "And just last year, I held the hand of my daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched, inherited disease. Some pain doesn't fade, it just changes shape. For Pierce, losing Charlotte wasn't just another tragedy. It was a reminder that no matter how much success or love you find, some wounds never close. They become part of you. And Pierce carried those wounds quietly, with dignity, but they never stopped hurting. Pierce Brosnan had survived the kind of loss that would break most people twice over, but the world didn't see that pain. They saw James Bond. They saw the suits, the confidence, the cool exterior. What they didn't see was the quiet way grief continued to shape his life behind closed doors. And then, just as he thought things couldn't get worse, Hollywood turned its back. In 2004, while filming After the Sunset in the Bahamas, Pierce received a short phone call. It lasted only 47 seconds. The voice on the other end told him, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you. Goodbye." That was it. No warning, no explanation, just silence. What Pierce didn't know at the time was that the studio had been planning his replacement for 2 years. While he continued to promote the franchise, perform his own stunts, and keep Bond alive for a new generation, executives were auditioning other actors in secret. He wasn't just let go, he was blindsided. The final Bond film he starred in, Die Another Day, had grossed $431 million globally. It was the highest performing Bond movie to date, and yet it meant nothing. Hollywood had decided he was too old. They wanted a younger, edgier version of Bond. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within weeks, 3 of his upcoming film deals collapsed. Offers that once paid $12 million dropped to just $3 million. Studios began labeling him as Too Bond, so closely tied to the character that no one could imagine him doing anything else. And just like that, Pierce Brosnan, the man who had saved the franchise, was cast aside. He had carried the Bond legacy for nearly a decade, revived it after years of decline, and brought in billions. But none of that protected him. For the second time in his life, he experienced a kind of professional betrayal that felt personal. He tried to hide the pain, just like he had with Cassandra and Charlotte. But this time, his children noticed. Years later, one of his sons recalled the moment they saw their father cry while watching the trailer for Casino Royale, the first Bond film without him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't jealousy, it was grief. A quiet realization that a major chapter of his life had ended without closure. And there was something even harder about this kind of loss. There was no funeral, no final goodbye, just the feeling that the world had moved on without him. For a man who had always defined himself through survival, it hit especially hard. But Pierce didn't let bitterness define him. He kept working, slowly rebuilding his career on his own terms. He turned to smaller films, independent projects, and artistic outlets that let him breathe again. One of those outlets was painting. It had started years earlier as a way to cope with Cassandra's illness, but it soon became something deeper, a form of therapy, a space where he could express pain without words. Yet behind every canvas, every brushstroke, the grief remained. Some losses don't get smaller with time, they just get quieter. For Pierce, both the professional betrayal and the personal tragedies became threads woven into who he was. Not wounds he hid from, but memories he carried. And through it all, he never stopped being a father. If there was one role Pierce Brosnan valued more than any character he ever played, it was being a father. And that bond, like everything else in his life, was shaped by both love and tragedy. One of the hardest things Pierce ever had to face didn't happen on a movie set. It happened quietly, over time. His adopted son, Christopher, began drifting away. Christopher was Cassandra's son from her previous marriage, but Pierce had stepped into his life early and embraced him completely. He gave him his name. He raised him as his own. There was no difference in his eyes. Christopher was his son. In the early years, they were inseparable. Christopher even worked with Pierce behind the scenes on film sets, carrying equipment and learning the craft. Their bond seemed unbreakable, but after Cassandra's death, everything changed. While Pierce stayed strong for the family, Charlotte leaned into that strength. Sean was still young and needed stability, but Christopher handled grief differently. He internalized it, held it close, and let it fester in silence. Over time, that silence turned into struggle. Christopher began battling addiction. It wasn't a moral failure, it was pain, unhealed and untreated. Pierce did everything he could: rehab, second chances, long talks, and even just sitting in silence, hoping something might break through. But here's where things got harder. You can love someone deeply, but you can't save them if they're not ready. And eventually, Pierce had to make an impossible choice for his own well-being and for the rest of the family. He stepped back. He didn't cut ties. He didn't stop loving him, but he loved him from a distance, waiting, hoping, and hurting. In one rare interview, Pierce said something that stayed with fans for years. Christopher is still very lost. I know where he is, but he's having a hard life. He knows how to get out. He doesn't want to. There was no anger in his voice, just heartbreak. This wasn't the kind of pain you could yell about. It was the quiet, slow-burning kind. The kind where every day feels like another tiny goodbye. Years passed. Christopher faded from the spotlight. When he reappeared, older and frailer, the transformation was striking. For Pierce, it felt like a different kind of grief, a funeral without a ceremony. His son was still alive, still out there, but the version of him that Pierce had once known and loved so closely seemed unreachable. That kind of loss is hard to describe. To lose a child to death is unbearable, but to lose them to life, to watch them drift, knowing they're still breathing somewhere, is a slow ache that never really goes away. And yet, even through all of this, Pierce never gave up. On Father's Day in 2022, he shared a quiet message. It included Christopher's name. No explanation, no spotlight, just a sign that the love was still there. Because for Pierce Brosnan, being a father means never walking away, even when the world collapses, even when dreams fall apart, even when the people you love become strangers to themselves. Through every award show, every film set, and every quiet night alone, Pierce has never stopped being a father first. For decades, Pierce Brosnan kept moving forward even when everything around him fell apart. But there was one constant, one person who quietly held him together behind the scenes: Keely Smith. Their story didn't start on a film set or a red carpet. It started at a beach party in 1994, just months before he would finally become James Bond. Pierce met Keely in Cabo San Lucas. He wasn't looking for love. He was still grieving, still carrying Cassandra's memory, and still trying to be a present father to his children. But Keely wasn't like anyone else. She was a journalist, thoughtful, grounded, and uninterested in the Hollywood spotlight. She didn't see the tuxedo. She didn't see James Bond. She saw the man behind the grief, and instead of trying to fix it, she simply stayed. That made all the difference. Keely didn't try to replace Cassandra or erase the past. She held space for it. When anniversaries rolled around and Pierce grew quiet, she didn't demand words. When Charlotte later fell ill and history repeated itself, Keely kept the house running. She became the person Pierce leaned on, silently, consistently, without question. In 2001, they married in Ireland, inside an 800-year-old abbey filled with family, friends, and peace. For Pierce, it wasn't just a wedding, it was a second chance, a statement that even after everything, loss, betrayal, heartbreak, love was still possible. They had 2 sons together, Dylan and Paris. Through them, Pierce rediscovered what it meant to raise a family. It wasn't about replacing what he had lost, it was about adding to the love he still had, and Keely made that possible. She created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and a quiet strength that allowed Pierce to breathe again. But not everyone saw their relationship with kindness. After the births of their children, tabloids began criticizing Keely's appearance. Headlines were brutal, and the public commentary was unrelenting. But Pierce didn't flinch. He responded simply and clearly. "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes." He meant it. His loyalty didn't change with fame. It had been forged through heartbreak, and he wasn't about to let the media rewrite his story. In 2024, Keely made headlines of her own, but for a very different reason. She revealed that she had lost over 100 pounds, not to please anyone, but to reclaim her health. "My body has survived love, children, and sorrow," she wrote. "Now I honour it by moving forward stronger." For Pierce, this wasn't a surprise. He had always seen her strength. The world was just catching up. Keely didn't save Pierce Brosnan, but she gave him something just as powerful: space to survive. She taught him that it was okay to laugh again, okay to celebrate again, and okay to keep going even when the past still hurts. When Charlotte passed away in 2013, Keely didn't collapse. She stood tall, anchoring the family through yet another devastating loss. That has always been her quiet miracle. Not to erase the sadness, but to show that joy can live beside it. Not to replace Cassandra or Charlotte, but to honour them by building a life where love could still grow. In the years following Charlotte's passing, Pierce Brosnan quietly reshaped his life, not with grand comebacks or media tours, but with purpose, peace and presence. He knew loss, he knew heartbreak, but he also knew that life had to keep moving forward, even when the weight of memory tried to hold you in place. He chose to build again, but this time on his terms. For nearly 2 decades, Pierce and Keely made their home at Orchid House, a Thai-inspired beachfront estate in Malibu. They designed it together from the ground up, filling it with warmth, art, and love. It wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary. In 2020, they sold the property for a reported $100 million, setting a record in the area. The move wasn't about downsizing, it was about shifting into a new season of life. Now, Pierce splits his time between another Malibu home and their longtime retreat in Kauai, Hawaii. These places aren't just luxury getaways, they are where life happens. Real life. His mornings often begin with coffee on the terrace with Keely, barefoot walks along the shore, yoga, painting. These are the pieces that hold him steady now. And painting has become more than a hobby. It began as an escape, a way to manage the storm when Cassandra was sick. But over the years, it became a true outlet for healing. Pierce's abstract paintings have been exhibited and even auctioned for charity. They're not perfect, and that's the point. They're honest. Creatively, he's still active in film, but now he's selective. He doesn't chase roles, he chooses stories that matter to him. Some are indie dramas, others are lighter, easier projects, but all of them are picked with care. Outside of acting, his advocacy work has only grown stronger. As a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, he supports children's rights and global relief efforts. Alongside Keely, he champions environmental causes, working with organisations like Greenpeace and the Natural Resources Defence Council to protect oceans, wildlife and fight climate change. And of course, cancer awareness remains a deeply personal mission. Pierce has never turned his back on that fight. He continues to fundraise, speak publicly, and donate in memory of Cassandra and Charlotte. The pain never left, but he turned it into purpose. Family is still at the centre of everything. His younger sons, Dylan and Paris, are pursuing their own creative careers. His older children, Sean and Christopher, remain part of the family's fabric, one woven together by both joy and tragedy. He's also a devoted grandfather. Time with Isabella and Lucas, Charlotte's children, is quiet, sacred, and never taken for granted. Physically, he takes care of himself with quiet discipline. His diet is simple: fresh produce, seafood, and minimal processed foods. He keeps a steady exercise routine, ocean swims, yoga, light strength training, not to chase youth, but to preserve energy for the people and causes he loves. Public appearances now are rare and intentional. When Pierce shows up, it's to promote a project or elevate a cause, not to stay in the spotlight. He stepped back from the noise and leaned into meaning, and maybe that's the most important part of his story. His legacy isn't just Bond, it isn't the money, the homes, or the fame. It's resilience, it's choosing to love again after loss, to speak quietly but live fully, to carry the grief not as a burden, but as proof that he lived deeply and loved fully. Pierce once said, "Life has to go on. And if it does, you better find something worth living for." He found it, in family, in art, in love, and in honouring those he's lost. At 72, Pierce Brosnan isn't trying to escape anything. He's walking through it, one day at a time, and that is what makes his story unforgettable.